So we're going to talk about, John said the animals. We're going to talk about the woolly mammoth populations, and you'll see why in just a minute. So what were the conditions? What are the conditions for an ice age? Well, it's not caused by extreme cold. Um, I think Craig, you talked about this not too long ago. Extreme cold wouldn't have the moisture to produce snow. What you need is warm oceans pumping moisture into cold atmosphere. So, what were the conditions after the flood? Well, we know mountains rose, the valleys sank, which would provide this differential heating. And John said you're going to have seasons of cold and summer. Um, what else do we know? Well, you had these heated oceans, which would be pumping moisture into the atmosphere. We knew there was volcanoes just all over the world, and even today, volcanoes can cause a all-year winter that can last for 2 or 3 years. So, all the dust in the atmosphere would block a lot of that solar radiation reaching the surface. So you would have prime conditions for moisture being pumped into an atmosphere that would be really cold. It's conditions suitable for an ice age. Well, there's been those, we've talked about this before. Michael Orr did some simulations of the weather, being that that's what his career was in, and it suggested that the ice age would occur for about the first 500 years after the flood, and maybe another 200 years of intermittent as it slowly ended and you had the melt. The reason I bring that up is we're going to talk about woolly mammoths. Woolly mammoths are essentially a adaptation from the elephant, or the elephant is from the woolly mammoths. We don't know what was taken on the ark, but they're just different from the elephants in that they have long hair, they have tiny tails and small ears. Again, an adaptation for winter cold conditions. And again, that is an indication of a loss of genetic information, not a generation of new genetic information. And what do we know? We know from excavations that there are a lot of woolly mammoths out there. One scientist, this Vareskin, said that there should be, from his estimates, about 5 million mammoths buried in Siberia alone. In the USA, we find them scattered all over America. So given that woolly mammoths require such an extensive amount of food and water, 400 to 650 pounds of food daily, 35 to 50 gallons of water daily, and knowing that they started with two at the Ark, is it possible that you could have 5 million mammoths buried in Siberia alone? Uh, how do you get that many within just a few hundred years of the ark? Is that possible? And then we'll talk about extinction as to what caused that as well. Well, what do we know from elephants? Well, we know there should have been of the elephant kind two that exited the ark, and they only have one offspring every 5 years, and their lifespan today is up to about 80 years. Can you get that many animals? Well, if you start just looking at this chart and assuming that 50% of the offspring are females, means 50% males, and they have one every 5 years, up to 80 years, and assuming no death, no predators. Now, that you may question, no predators. Well, you also had just two of each kind of predator exiting the ark, and they were told to scatter to fill the earth, as John said. Plus, you would have had carcasses from the flood over the earth. It's a pretty good assumption. No predation for quite a long time. Well, if you look at this, after 10 years, you've only got four. After 20 years, you've only got eight. And if you do the linear and extend it out, you would see at 300 years, at the peak of it, you would only have about 86 of these elephants, not 5 million. But the problem, as John said, is it's not linear growth, it's exponential growth because your offspring are reproducing. And if you add in the offspring reproducing as well, you find that you could get at 250 years, you could get up to the 5 million. At 300 years, you could get up close to 20 million. So, yes, you can easily get that. This is just showing you how you could just do a very simple calculation. You could use the exponential model, but with all the offspring reproducing, it's like compounding interest. So again, you easily can get that many millions of mammoths by the middle of the ice age by simple calculations. The problem with this is, as I said, it's that it doesn't include predation. Keep in mind, they also find that it's just not just mammoths, that these areas of Siberia, the areas where there was this ice, had a wide diversity of animals, many that went extinct. Um, so when I was in college working on my doctor's degree, I took a lot of math classes, a lot of engineering classes, but one of my favorite classes was mathematical modeling. And we did mathematical modeling of populations and predator prey. In the blue, you'd see the prey population would increase until there'd be a lag, and then the predator population increases. And when it does, then the prey population goes back down till it hits a minimum. Well, now the predator doesn't have anything to eat on, so it goes back down. And these cycles go on until you get to a carrying capacity out here at the end at some point, if there's no other factors. So he had us looking at populations of fish, particularly after World War II, when the men around certain islands where the men went off to war and there were no people fishing. And then you could look at the shark populations that they monitored and the fish populations. And we would do this type of modeling, which is very interesting. But what we see with them was it didn't continue this cycling, but their population went up and then went down to nothing. They went extinct. So there's some other factor you have to put into the model besides just the predator prey populations, which you can add in very easily. You can add in an exponential equation for the predators. Well, what was it? Well, it was most likely caused by a combination of things, but I think the main factor was climate change. Remember, we talked about how the oceans were warm from the flood, God breaking up the fountains of the deep, and you had all these thermal jets ejecting hot water into the waters. And the waters before the flood were likely much warmer as well because they were shallow seas instead of the oceans that we see today. Um, but once that starts ending and starts getting to a new equilibrium, you're not going to have the moisture pumped up. You're not going to be having the ice age continuing. Now you've got this animal that's adapted for very cold conditions, and you're moving into a period of warmer, drier atmosphere. And you've got all this frozen ground. It's going to be bare when it melts, and at that time, you're going to have extreme winds because you've got these cold areas over now drier atmosphere. Extreme winds, which causes dust storms. And Craig, you talked about this. So you're going to have not just a loss of the habitat because the Siberian area was an area of extensive grasslands. And if you look in North America, just below where the glaciers were, it's where we have our black soils, which are made from grasslands. So it would have been a great environment for these types of our bison, but also the woolly mammoths that would turn colder in the winter and have these incredible grasslands to feed on during the summertime. Well, now those are going to be lost. So you're going to have a loss of food, loss of water. You've got all of this dust in the air, which is going to increase diseases with pathogens. And you're also still going to have the predator pressure. But you also have to remember that what was about 100 years after the flood that you had the Tower of Babel. So now you've got the dispersion and you've got people dispersing, moving up into Siberia area where all of the mammoths are, going across to America. So you're also going to have hunting pressures. So you've got to add those into your equation: hunting pressure, disease pressures, um, and just loss of habitat. So the people populations, which were probably, as John's showing, increasing exponentially, migrate into these areas where you've got these high animal populations, and all these factors, I think, are what's going to go into causing you to lose the mammoths. I thought this was a good example of just the dynamics that populations can go through. That a population, and I think, Craig, you mentioned this earlier, after the flood, certain niches needed to be filled, and you have these great conditions for the woolly mammoths to just, their population to just explode. But climate change was the main factor, losing them, because with that climate change brought disease, brought more predation, and then eventually hunting.